Population 1,400. The Atuans are traditionally enthusiastic agriculturalists. When Captain Cook landed in 1777, they grew coconuts, taro, plantains. They now also grow oranges and pineapples for export. But to make pineapple production economically viable, the island required a safe and workable harbour through which to ship its fruit. The existing landing at Atiu, a 25-metre gap blasted out of the coral reef at Tonganui, was subject to considerable surging from the ocean swells, often making it difficult and dangerous to work. As bilateral development aid to the Cook Islands, New Zealand granted nearly $500,000 for a small lightering harbour to be constructed by the New Zealand Army. Its shipping address was to be Army Atiu. June 1974. The first detachment of 30 soldiers from 1 Field Squadron Royal New Zealand Engineers arrived on the island. They set up camp on the outskirts of Mapumai village, about 3 kilometres from the work site. With military precision and attention to detail, they brought with them all the plant and initial stores necessary. Army engineers, in conjunction with the New Zealand Ministry of Works and Development, designed a harbour to be sited beside the island's existing landing at Tonganui. Sappers start on their exercise to blast a harbour 3 metres deep, 36 metres long and 18 metres wide, backed by a 6-metre wide loading quay. To protect it from the powerful Pacific swells, a concrete sea wall would surround the harbour. Down on the reef, work got underway. The Halco pneumatic drilling rig was spiralling its way 3.5 metres down into the coral, in preparation for the explosives that would pre-split the perimeter of the harbour and form a footing to the sea wall. By day and night, the drilling continued until the first series of holes was ready to receive the charges. In temperatures exceeding 30 degrees, it was hot and tiring work ramming explosives into shot holes, even standing in the water.
Look up! Firing now!
At the end of the day, back to camp for a shower and relaxation. Atu's isolation restricted spare time activities. The pool table had a lot of use. The only movies on the island were screened in the open air by the troops, for themselves and a few invited guests. But several hundred uninvited were also welcome. Though traditionally hospitable, the Atuans had some misgivings about the social impact of foreign soldiers living in their midst. But their misgivings were quickly forgotten, and the Kiwis were soon welcomed and accepted as full members of the community. The islanders' very real friendship was displayed each week when their 5 villages took it in turn to make large gifts of fresh fruit and vegetables to the team. It didn't take long for the troops to pick up a little of the island culture. Mid-afternoon smoko and a dancing class for those in camp. A wobble and a wiggle, and they felt they'd graduated. Often it didn't look like a very military expedition, not even after the Atiu version of the Army's short back and sides. The only time the New Zealanders really appeared as soldiers was at the regular morning parade when the day's tasks were allocated. Even then, they wouldn't have satisfied a Sergeant Major's inspection back home. More like Dad's army coming up. In general, a 9-hour day, 6-day week was worked, with the drillers working 8-hour shifts round the clock when water conditions on the reef permitted. While drilling and blasting continued, the dislodged coral and makatea, a type of coral limestone, was being carted away. It was fed into a crusher and then stockpiled as the concrete aggregate for the sea wall and quay. Local labour was employed at 40 cents an hour, the ruling male rate of pay on Atiu, each man being employed for only 14 days so the work could be shared. Rough, unsealed roads and salt water meant severe wear and tear on the equipment. Servicing was an unending task for the mechanics seconded from the Army's Corps of Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. They needed to call on their great store of experience and ingenuity to keep the trucks, concrete mixers, pneumatic hammers, and all other plant operating in these extreme conditions. The tantalizing aroma of fresh, crisp bread rolls wafted from the kitchen tent every day. The two Army Service Corps chefs were ably assisted by local girls employed as kitchen hands. The sappers even constructed their own field oven from a spare 44-gallon drum and a few concrete blocks. All supplies, both domestic and technical, had to be ordered either from Rarotonga or, in most cases, from New Zealand. The Royal New Zealand Corps of Signals maintained the equipment, providing a regular and reliable communications link with one field squadron's home base at Papakura and with the liaison officer at Rarotonga. The radio link was also a morale booster, enabling the men to talk with their loved ones back home. The job was always challenging and never easy. Shot holes had to be sunk with handheld drills. Part of a cliff face had to be removed to make way for the key. Several design features had to be modified on the site due to the porous and unstable nature of the reef. Local cooperation was greatly appreciated by the engineers during the long concrete pouring sessions. Unpaid volunteers helped load mixers and wheel countless barrows of concrete to the sea wall and quay. Altogether, 1,300 cubic meters of concrete was poured, and that's a lot of barrow loads. Without this volunteer assistance, the job would have been considerably prolonged. 360 tons of steel, together with 390 tons of cement, were used in the pours. On these occasions, everyone was pressed into service. The chefs, the medic, the communicator, and even the detachment commander manned the mixers and barrows. The job did have its compensations, however. The dust and grime of toil were soon removed by a refreshing dip in the sea. At intervals during the project, in order to give as many men as possible experience in tropical conditions, the detachments were replaced from New Zealand. A total of 90 soldiers was employed for varying periods on the harbour. The New Zealanders returned local hospitality in many ways. They hosted a hangi in the camp for the Atiuans who had assisted on the project. Later, several of the island's dancing groups entertained the guests.
Oh boy, give me a night in June.
During the whole exercise, on the job and off, 84,000 cans of beer helped the thirsty soldiers replace some of the body fluids lost by sweat. The Atiuans are a deeply religious people. Prayers and hymns precede all public activities. Sundays for the troops were days of relaxation with no organized sport or entertainment. They joined in worship with the island's 3 churches and paraded as a unit at a combined youth service held in the Cook Islands Christian Church. As the harbour construction progressed, the Atiuans were busy bringing more land into production, adding to the 240 hectares already planted. By improved production techniques, Atiu should be able to produce 10,000 tons of pineapples annually, most for export to New Zealand in the form of canned fruit and juice. Sir Albert Henry, Premier of the Cook Islands.
New Zealand is our only market. If we are not able to keep up our quota, we can lose that market. Because there are many other countries that are wanting to sell their product to New Zealand. In an attempt to maintain our place in the New Zealand market, we have to increase the production. And in order to get the production to the factory and to the market, we've got to have a better harbour.
the sea wall complete, the might of Pacific swells tested man's work. During the course of the project, an estimated 30% of time was lost due to high seas pounding on the reef and breaking over the wall. Anyone for a shower? Next task was the excavation of the basin to a depth of 3 meters below mean sea level. 4,000 cubic meters of coral had to be removed. Where earlier a Massey Ferguson dozer had operated in only a few centimeters of water, as the harbour became totally flooded, explosives were used underwater to break up the coral.
Look up! Fire now!
To assist in dredging the harbour floor, a hydraulic excavator purchased in New Zealand was airdropped by the RNZAF to the engineers. Of the total 13,000 cubic meters of macatiere and coral excavated during the project, some was used as concrete aggregate, while the rest was stockpiled for use later in upgrading the island's roads. A sapper takes the easy way to check the harbour depth. In June 1975, it became necessary to fly in from New Zealand a team of 4 Army divers. Under the command of a territorial force officer, they assisted in the excavation of the floor and the breaching of the harbour entrance. These men worked in extremely trying conditions, positioning drills and placing explosives underwater. They were continually being thrown against the reef by what were only small to moderate swells by Pacific standards. Preparing a 12-pound charge of gelignite is just like cutting a roll of luncheon sausage. A total of 3.5 tons of explosives was used to shatter the coral on the project. As the coral reef was cut back by successive blasts to form the opening, volunteers were called for from the local population to assist in clearing the rubble. Sheer brute force, combined with the Polynesian natural sense of rhythm, was responsible for shifting great hunks of coral. Many local men have been taught basic engineering techniques and have been employed on the project. It takes a skilled man to drill a vertical hole from a heaving raft. The Army is not just leaving a completed harbour on the island of Atiu. It is also leaving the expertise to operate and maintain the many pieces of equipment being left behind as a gift from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. While work continued on clearing the entrance, the government vessel Ravakai arrived from Rarotonga with the last shipload of supplies to come ashore at the old Tonganui landing. The operation was drawing to a close, and the troops were guests at many umukais and other social functions, at which tokens of the high esteem in which they were held were presented. Even the washerwomen from the 5 villages who had looked after the detachment's laundry were represented. Each man received 5 strings of beads and many kisses, at least one from each village. And the next morning, more kisses and an emotional farewell for those returning to New Zealand at the end of their tour of duty. Every soldier leaving Atiu took with him a large measure of goodwill and friendship as the fruits of his labour, and happy memories of this isolated little island. Friday, July the 11th, 1975, and the whole population assembles for the opening ceremonies. This is a special day, a day that signals in a practical way the support New Zealand can give its Pacific neighbours. It's also a day of celebration and welcome to the Honourable W.A. Fraser, New Zealand's Minister of Defence, and his wife. Sir Albert Henry, Premier of the Cook Islands, Mr. Fraser, and the Chief of General Staff, Major General R.H.F. Holloway, inspect the men who have now completed their task. The Honourable Mr. Fraser.
It's my very great pleasure now, Sir Albert, to hand over to your government this new harbour on behalf of the government and the people of New Zealand. And in doing so, to tell you that it has given us great joy to be enjoined with you on this relatively small, but nevertheless, I know, important project to the people of Atiu, the Cook Islands, and to us New Zealanders as a whole.
Sir Albert Henry replied.
This exercise, we hope, would be an example to the rest of the world. That an army cannot only be looked upon as a machinery of destruction, but it can be looked upon also as a machinery of peace and economic development. They did not only come to build the harbour, they also came to build a better community. And it's something that a government cannot do. Only people can do among themselves.
Accompanied by island dignitaries, the visitors inspected the harbour facilities before being entertained on the quay by many of Atu's cultural groups. The pineapple crop, carefully nurtured and protected to increase its export capacity, had been harvested. And quietly next morning, almost as an anticlimax following the festivities, the first shipment was loaded. As the last detachment of soldiers departed on their journey home, they knew that through their efforts, the island of Atu will be forever grateful to the people of New Zealand. In particular, to one field squadron, Royal New Zealand Engineers.